Okay, this is the suspension install for a 1968 MGC-GT. There's a particular order to this. Actually everything's apart right now except for the new suspension shock absorber, and I got the sway bar back in and some other pieces. The first part I started with, other than the shock absorber, which doesn't need to be in right now, but I did that first because you have to take apart some stuff in the engine to get to the top nut. But this tie bar is the first thing I started with, and that's because the right behind the tie bar, where the nut goes on the end, right along here will sit the torsion bar once it's installed, and that makes it difficult to tighten up this bolt back here on the tie bar. So I put the tie bar in first, and the best way I found to do that is to just use a wrench on the back and hold the back steady as you twist on the front, and you can get a good amount of torque on it to get it pretty tight. I can always tighten it down a little bit at the back, but there's not a lot of area for movement back there, so I find that it's best to do it this way and to spin it on with this, just holding the nut at the back with a wrench. Alright, so I've got that in place and it's pretty stiff, but I can always tighten it down a little bit more once the tie bar is in place. But so the next piece I'll put in is the torsion bar, and that gets put in from the front to the back. So there's some holes up here. I don't know if you'll be able to get a good look at them because it's a little dark, but there's some holes. Get the light. That'll feed through. You can see the hole there, and you can see the light coming through up under there. It goes right through kind of the frame pieces and into the back. So if you feed it through the front, it makes it a lot easier. So I'll do that now. Okay, so once you have the torsion bar through the other side, leave it that way. Don't put the adjustment piece on yet, because you have to connect the front first. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so first thing I did was I took the fulcrum pin and I put that through the bushing, new bushing in there. Made sure to lube it up good. I got a big tub of suspension grease or lubricant. Next part I did was I put the rear half of the A-arm, which is right here, and I threaded that onto the torsion bar, and then I'll take that and I'll just seat it right on to that fulcrum pin right there, so that's all connected. Once that's all in place, we can adjust it later. This has got to be adjusted, and I'll show you how to do that to the right angle so that there'll be the correct amount of torsion on the suspension and on the torsion bar when the car is lowered back down onto the wheels. Okay, well, it turns out there's not a lot of space back behind the shock absorber to fit the top suspension pieces on, so I took the shock absorber back out and we'll put that back in later. I've pre-assembled the top pieces all together, and hopefully will make it a little bit easier, but it's easy either way, really. So I'll put those on now. Okay, when you're putting the top pieces back together, remember that there's several bits to this, and the lock nuts go underneath this black tab. This is it's really hard to see right now, but there's a black locking plate that goes on over the lock washers, and then the nut and bolt go on the top. Okay, so now that the top is all connected, and you can see it's still loose, and the bottom, I have gone ahead and I've connected the rear A-arm, the rear lower A-arm, to the spindle assembly, which I have pre-assembled. So that's kind of connected but really loose. And then the front A-arm, I'm just going to swing that up and connect it to the front part of the lower trunnion here. And it has to be very loose up at the top, or else it won't be able to get wide enough to be able to fit around that. But trial and error, you can make it work. Okay, so now that the bottom is all put together, but loosely bolted down, it's none of it's tight yet. I'm going to actually adjust the torsion suspension, the torsion bar tension right now. And the way the manual tells you to do it is that this a pivot point here on the lower trunnion has to be 6.5 inches below the level of the pivot point up here. And so what I did on the other side, and which we'll work with for this side, is just get a level, and I'm gonna level this out, hold it with my hand, and then use just a plain old ruler to measure 6.5 inches down from level. And then what I've found is that the way I have my car jacked, that if I just rest the spindle on the ground, and I can use that as a pivot point off the ground to adjust the height here. So I can either bend it down to lower if it needs more than 6.5, if it's not 6.5 yet, or I can pivot it up and rest it on the ground like that, and that way I can easily get the fine adjustment to 6.5 inches. Okay, once you have it set to a position where you have 6.5 inches between the top pivot point and the bottom pivot point from a level plane, then that's when you go back to the back of the torsion bar and you install here. Let me see if I can get a better view. Okay, you install this adjustment piece level, and so that it's tight up inside of the cup right there. So I'll install that now and make sure it's all nice and tight, and that bar is already set to a position, the torsion bar is already set to a position that equates to 6.5 inches up front. Okay, now I've gotten the adjustment seated onto the torsion bar. And you can see that it sticks out a little bit. It's supposed to do that because this piece is supposed to sit in that groove right there. Now the next part is kind of tricky, but you got to get this bolt up under here and then thread it through, and it'll come out this hole right here. So we'll do that next. Well, I have to apologize because I got impatient and I put the whole thing back together. But I will go ahead and explain what I did from where we left off. So we'll start at the back with the torsion bar adjustment. Okay, so when we left off, I was installing the torsion bar adjustment piece, and you can see that's now fully installed, and tightened down the nut here, put the bolt through from the other side and tighten down the nut, and then the adjustment bolt is sitting up inside the cup here, and that's firmly in place, and then you tighten down this nut just to lock it in place, and that's all I have to do at the back. And then we'll see how we finish off the front of the suspension. Okay, up at the front I did a lot of work to get it to where it is right now. Obviously, when you saw it in the last video, the spindle here was laying down flat. The top pivot point was not attached, and this was resting on the ground here, and that was giving us our 6.5 inches. Also, the shock absorber bottom piece was not installed, so the way I did it is the torsion bar is now under tension, so in order to raise that up from that 6.5 position, you have to put load on the torsion bar, so that's gonna take a lot of strength. So what I did is I got a rubber piece, and I put a rubber piece under the bottom here of this. Actually, is what I used right here. So I have this rubber piece that sits on my jack stand, and I put that underneath here to protect it, and then I jacked this up slowly until I got it to a position where I could feed in the bottom of the shock absorber between the two halves of the lower A-arm, and then I put the bolt through and attached that there. And then I jacked it up a little bit more, and I got it to a position where I could rotate the spindle up in between the two halves of the upper A-arm, and then attach put the bolt through, attach it with the nut, and then put the cotter pin through to hold it down tight. Also putting in the sway bar end link and attaching that with the bolt on the other side. And then also the last bit is attaching the end link from the steering and putting that through, attaching that bolt on the top. And that's basically all there is to it. So this torsion bar is now under tension. Obviously it's extended as most as it can, but the upper A-arm and the strut is preventing it from going down any further. And then once we get the hub and the wheel back on and lower it back down, obviously this will come up to a normal ride height, and we'll have to measure the distance here, and there's procedure in the manual which I'll show you after to adjust the ride height to the appropriate level, and we'll use the torsion bar adjustment bolt at the back that I showed you earlier to adjust the ride height a little bit up and down. So that's it. The next video I'll probably do is to assemble and mount the hubs. So there'll be bearing replacement in that video, and then hub install along with the new rotors that I bought. And then obviously I'll put the brakes on. I'm still waiting on new brake lines, so I'll put the new brake lines on, put the brakes on with the new hubs and rotors, and then I'll be pretty much done.